As the sun dipped below the horizon in the courtyard of Buckingham Palace, a sharp voice shattered the tranquility. It belonged to Miss Karen Mitchell, a haughty woman of high society known for her disrespect towards the royal guards. Her designer purse swung wildly as she gestured towards the increasingly exasperated palace staff. "Are you telling me that last entry was 30 minutes ago?" she demanded, her American accent sharp with indignation. "Do you have any idea how much I paid for this tour? Do you know who I am?" She thrust her phone forward, displaying what appeared to be a business card for a mid-level real estate agent in Connecticut. The staff member, a composed gentleman in his 50s, maintained his professional demeanor. "I am afraid, madam, but the palace visiting hours are clearly stated. We cannot make exceptions for security reasons." "Security reasons?" Karen scoffed, her manicured hand flying to her meticulously coiffed blonde hair. "Look around. There are still people inside. What difference would one more person make?" She gestured towards the palace windows, where the last tour group could be seen drifting through the staterooms. A young couple with 2 small children quietly moved away from the entrance. The mother whispered something in French to her husband, pulling him away from Karen's escalating tantrum. The father nodded, steering his family towards the palace gardens. With practiced patience, the staff member explained, "The difference, madam, is that our last tour group entered within the designated visiting hours. We adhere to strict schedules so that—" "Oh, spare me the bureaucratic nonsense," Karen interrupted, her voice rising in pitch. "That's the problem with this country. Too many rules. Too many people hiding behind protocol instead of using common sense." She adjusted her designer's sunglasses in a motion that seemed calculated to draw attention to their expensive brand. A group of Japanese tourists paused their picture-taking, their faces a mixture of discomfort and fascination as Karen continued her tirade. An elderly British couple shook their heads in disapproval, the woman muttering something to her husband about "these kind of people." "I want to speak to your supervisor," Karen announced, adopting the battle stance familiar to service staff worldwide. "Clearly, you don't understand that some rules are meant to be bent for the right people." The emphasis she placed on "right" dripped with the arrogance of someone unaccustomed to being denied anything. The staff member's posture remained impeccable, but a flicker in his eyes suggested he had encountered this type of tourist before. "My supervisor would tell you exactly the same thing, madam. The palace security protocols are not negotiable. Perhaps you would like some information about tomorrow's tours." Karen's face flushed with a rage that clashed with her pastel designer blouse. "Tomorrow? Tomorrow? I am not some common tourist who can rearrange your schedule at your convenience. I have an itinerary. I have standards." Her voice had risen to a volume that startled the nearby pigeons into flight. Just then, her eyes landed on the royal guard standing stoically nearby. Something shifted in her expression, a calculating glint suggesting she had found a new target for her frustration. Clutching her purse tighter, she turned her back on the staff member, her heels clicking decisively on the pavement. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness, "if you're not going to help me, I'll just find someone who will. Someone who's actually important around here." Her eyes never left the guard as she began to walk towards him, her entire demeanor broadcasting that she was about to demonstrate precisely how important she believed herself to be. The staff member opened his mouth to warn her, but she was already within earshot, her designer heels carrying her towards what was likely to be a profound lesson in respect and tradition. As Karen approached the royal guard, her heels struck the pavement with a sharp precision, the sound of someone accustomed to commanding attention. Her designer sunglasses were now perched atop her head like a tiara, allowing everyone to see the determined glint in her eyes. "Excuse me," she called out, her tone carrying the same impatience she used with waiters who brought her the wrong wine. "Yes, you, in the furry hat. I need you to help me with something." She positioned herself directly in front of the guard, deliberately invading his personal space. The guard remained motionless, eyes fixed straight ahead with the discipline of years of military service. His scarlet tunic blazed in the afternoon sun, each brass button and metal telling its own story of dedication and service. Stories Karen was too self-absorbed to read. "Hey, I'm talking to you." She waved a manicured hand in front of his face, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. Is this some kind of performance? Just standing there like a statue while paying customers are being mistreated. Her voice escalated with each question, drawing uncomfortable glances from passing tourists. A middle-aged couple hurried their children past, the father quietly explaining to his curious daughter why the lady's behavior was not appropriate. Karen either didn't notice or didn't care about the example she was setting. "Look," she continued, her tone taking on a more condescending edge, "I get that you have your little routine here. It's cute, really. Quaint." She adjusted her Gucci blouse, a habitual gesture that seemed designed to remind everyone of her perceived status. "But I'm sure you can break character for a moment and tell your colleagues to let me into the palace. I'm not just anyone, you know." The guard's posture remained perfect, but someone with military experience might have noticed a slight tightening of his jaw, the only visible sign that he registered her words at all. "This is ridiculous," Karen announced to no one in particular, although it was clear she was playing to the growing crowd of uncomfortable onlookers. "I've been to Disney World, and even the character actors there know when to break character for important guests." She rummaged in her designer bag, ostentatiously producing a business card. "Here, Karen Mitchell, luxury real estate. I sell multi-million-dollar properties. I'm the kind of person you want to be accommodating." When the guard didn't react to her credentials, her frustration became palpable. "Are you even listening to me, or is this whole?" She gestured vaguely at his uniform. "Just for show? Because right now, you're not providing very good customer service." A cluster of British citizens had gathered nearby, their expressions darkening with disapproval at her dismissive attitude towards their traditions. An elderly man wearing a veteran's badge on his lapel watched with particular interest, his weathered face showing the quiet understanding of someone who grasped exactly what Karen was failing to comprehend. "You know," Karen's voice took on the sharp edge of someone unaccustomed to being ignored, "I'm starting to think you're not even a real soldier. A real soldier wouldn't just stand there while a lady needed help. This is probably just some tourist trap, actors dressed up for the cameras." She stepped closer, her expensive perfume invading the surrounding air. "And not very good actors, at that." The guard's discipline held firm, but there was a shift in the atmosphere, subtle but palpable, like the drop in pressure before a storm. His eyes remained fixed ahead, but they held the weight of someone who had seen real service, real combat, real sacrifice. Concepts as foreign to Karen as the idea that she might not be the most important person in any given situation. Her hand tightened on her purse, her knuckles white with growing anger. For someone who viewed the world entirely through the lens of customer service and social status, being ignored was more than an inconvenience. It was an affront. "You people clearly don't understand how things work in the real world." Karen's voice escalated further, reaching the shrill pitch that had made her infamous at every country club she frequented. The sound sliced through the afternoon air, sharp, unpleasant, and redolent with privilege, like expensive crystals shattering on marble. "When someone of my standing addresses you, you respond. It's a basic matter of decorum, something you wouldn't know about standing here like a glorified wind-up toy." Her Hermes scarf fluttered in the breeze as she tilted her head, the designer label prominently displayed, a habit born of measuring her worth in brand names. The pearls around her neck caught the sunlight, each one perfect and likely real, just like the facade she had cultivated over years in Connecticut's most exclusive social circles. She began to circle the guard, like a predator, although her attempt at intimidation was somewhat undermined by the sharp clicking of her designer heels against the ancient stones. Each step echoed with the same entitled authority she used when inspecting open houses or directing caterers at charity luncheons. "I bet you're not even qualified for a real military position. That's why they have you dressed up here. Playing soldier, isn't it? Couldn't make it an actual service, so they gave you a silly hat and told you to stand still." The guard ceremonial rifle remained perfectly still, its brass fittings gleaming with the kind of polish that spoke of hours of dedication. Dedication Karen mistook for subservience. Her reflection rippled on its surface, distorting her carefully maintained image into something closer to her true nature. The elderly veteran shifted his weight, years of military discipline barely suppressing his reaction to her words. His campaign medals clinked softly against each other, each one earned in moments of bravery Karen couldn't comprehend. Nearby, a young mother covered her son's ears, steering him away from the scene, whispering something about, "We don't behave like that, sweetie." The growing crowd watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as Karen continued her tirade. Their phones, moments before aimed at capturing the palace, were lowered, a silent gesture of respect for the guard's dignity rather than interest in her spectacle. "Let me explain something about authority to you," she continued, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried like poison through the courtyard. Her breath reeked of expensive coffee and the kind of entitlement that steamrolled service staff throughout New England. Real authority comes from success, from status. I drive a Mercedes. I live in a gated community. I'm on the board of 3 different charities. Each statement was delivered like a weapon, intended to wound what she perceived as lower-class insolence. Her diamond tennis bracelet flashed in the light, each glint a reminder of the wealth she wore like armor. The guard's posture remained perfect, but there was something different about his demeanor now, a presence that seemed to grow with each of her insults, like steel being tempered in a fire. The ceremonial rifle gleamed in the fading sunlight, its polished surface reflecting Karen's contorted expression back at her. Years of military service had taught him about true authority, the kind earned through sacrifice, not purchased with platinum credit cards. A slight breeze ruffled the feathers on his bearskin hat, the only movement in his otherwise statuesque form. It carried with it the faint scent of Karen's Chanel No. 5, a fragrance likely more expensive than a week of his wages, yet failing to mask the increasing sourness of her disposition. "Oh, still playing soldier, are we?" she sneered, her frustration mounting at his continued silence. Her manicured fingers drummed a rhythmic beat against her designer purse, a nervous tick betraying the first crack in her confident facade. "Does the Queen even know you're out here embarrassing her country, making paying tourists feel unwelcome?" She rummaged in her bag, pulling out her phone with the same flourish she used to distribute business cards at networking events. Maybe we should give her a call. I'm sure she'd be thrilled to hear how her toy soldiers treat important visitors. The phone case was leather and monogrammed, because even her accessories needed to announce to the world how expensive they were. She held it like a weapon, but against the guard's unwavering discipline. It seemed as ineffective as her previous attempt at intimidation. A group of American tourists had stopped to watch, their faces burning with secondhand embarrassment. One whispered to another, "She doesn't represent us," as if trying to distance themselves from their compatriots' behavior. Their own phones remained tucked away in their pockets. This wasn't entertainment. It was an appalling display of everything that was wrong with entitled tourism. "You know what your problem is?" Karen's voice took on the sharp, accusatory tone she reserved for berating restaurant managers. "You think this uniform, this little show, makes you special. But let me tell you something, I've seen better security guards at the mall back home. At least they know how to treat VIP customers with respect." The veteran had moved closer now, his campaign medals catching the light, each one a testament to real service, real sacrifice. Concepts as foreign to Karen as the idea that she might not be the center of the universe in every situation. "This is your last chance," she announced, her voice trembling with indignation. "Either you drop this ridiculous act and help me, or I am going to make sure everyone knows how you treat valued visitors. I have connections, you know. One phone call and I can." Her voice stopped abruptly as a young child in the crowd tugged on his father's hand, asking, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Daddy, why is that angry lady being so mean to the soldier?" The innocent question hung in the air, underscoring the absurdity of her behavior. But instead of prompting reflection, the child's question only seemed to fuel her rage further, her face flushing crimson as her grip tightened on her designer bag, the leather creaking under the strain. She was escalating, moving towards a line she hadn't dared cross before. "You think you're better than me?" she hissed, her composure cracking like cheap veneer. "Standing there in your costume, ignoring someone who could buy and sell your entire year's salary with one commission check." Her free hand slowly rose, trembling with anger. "Well, let me show you what I think of your precious protocol." The air crackled with tension as her hand drew back, the afternoon sun glinting off the diamond rings on her fingers, glittering symbols of the wealth she believed could shield her from consequences. The crowd collectively held its breath, recognizing the moment when entitlement was about to collide head-on with unyielding dignity. The slap echoed through the courtyard like a gunshot. Karen's manicured hand struck the guard's cheek with a sharp crack that resonated off the palace walls. A few tourists gasped, a child began to cry, and someone in the crowd muttered, "Bloody hell." The sound hung in the air, a violent punctuation mark on the afternoon's serene facade, an act that would forever alter its memory. The guard's head didn't even flinch. Her hand had landed squarely, leaving an angry red mark on his cheek. But his posture remained unchanged, his discipline unyielding. If anything, his demeanor seemed to grow stronger, more present in the shocked silence that followed. Karen stood there, hands still raised, a flicker of triumph warring with uncertainty on her face. Perhaps she had expected him to break character, to crumble under her assault. Instead, she was confronted with something she had never encountered before, a dignity that could not be slapped away, a strength that had nothing to do with wielding power over others. "There," she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier, "Maybe now you'll learn to show proper respect to your betters." The word cut through the courtyard like a blade, quiet but carrying the weight of command. The guard's eyes, which had been fixed straight ahead throughout her tirade, now met hers directly. There was no anger in his gaze, no hatred, but something far more unnerving. The calm, measured assessment of a warrior who had faced far worse than an entitled tourist. A pin drop would have echoed in the silence. Even the pigeons had ceased their cooing, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. The red mark on the guard's cheek stood out, not as a sign of his vulnerability, but as a testament to her own lack of it. "In my 12 years of service," the guard began, his voice carrying the weight of true authority, "I've been shot at in Afghanistan, faced down mortar fire in Iraq, and seen my friends die on foreign soil." His words were measured, precise, each one a hammer blow against Karen's crumbling facade. "This uniform you sneer at is stained with the blood of those who died, defending the very freedoms you so readily abuse." Karen took an involuntary step back, her designer heel catching on the cobblestones. The guard's presence seemed to fill the entire courtyard now, his demeanor no longer merely ceremonial, but radiating the raw military authority that lay beneath the tradition. "This costume, as you call it, is worn with the pride of centuries of service. Each button, each medal, each crease represents the sacrifice of those who protect not just a palace, but the principles of duty, honor, and respect." His voice remained level, but it carried an intensity that made Karen's earlier shouting seem childish. The elderly veteran had moved closer, standing at attention, his own service medals gleaming in the fading sunlight. His presence added a silent testimony to the guard's words. Decades of shared sacrifice and understanding bridged the generations between them. Karen's mouth opened and closed, the carefully constructed composure dissolving under the weight of true authority. Her hand, the one she had used to strike him, now hung limply at her side, her diamond tennis bracelet no longer quite so proudly displayed. "The mark you leave," the guard's gaze flicked briefly to the swelling crowd, "will fade in minutes. The mark you've left on your own character, however, will last far longer." His eyes returned to her, now holding something closer to pity than anger. "Was it worth it, madam? Did striking a soldier make you feel more important?" I didn't know," Karen stammered, her privileged, carefully constructed world beginning to fracture. The veteran stepped forward, his posture still military, his strength undiminished by age. 2 tours in Afghanistan, he said, his voice carrying the gravelly weight of experience his medal represented. It's not given for just standing still, ma'am. It's given for courage under fire. He gestured to his own array of decorations. Mine was earned in the Falklands, watching men younger than him make sacrifices you couldn't even imagine. Karen's designer sunglasses slipped from her head and clattered unnoticed on the ground. The crowd remained silent, witnessing a lesson in humility delivered with surgical precision. While you've been concerning yourself with real estate values and country club memberships, the veteran continued, men in this uniform have been patrolling hostile territories, risking their lives to protect the very freedoms you so casually disregard. His eyes met the guards, a shared understanding passing between them. Including the freedom to make a bloody fool of yourself in public, he added, a hint of wryness in his voice. A younger man in civilian clothes, but with a bearing that suggested military training, stepped forward from the crowd. RF, sir, he addressed the guard with quiet respect. 2 years ago, your unit provided overwatch for our extraction in Helmand. You lost 2 men, ensuring our wounded got out. The guard gave a near imperceptible nod, the unspoken acknowledgement of shared sacrifice hanging in the air between them. Karen's face had drained of all color, her earlier bravado replaced by the dawning realization of exactly what kind of man she had struck. The bearskin cap you mocked, the veteran's voice gained an edge of steel, is earned in battle. The ceremonial rifle you belittled represents centuries of service to the crown and country. Every part of this uniform tells a story of sacrifice, duty, and honor, concepts that apparently need explaining to someone who measures their worth by the price tag on her purse. Karen's grip on her designer bag loosened, the status symbol suddenly feeling insignificant in the face of genuine service. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of shame that was beginning to creep up her neck. I have watched men in this uniform die. The guard spoke again, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had commanded not just on boardroom tables, but on battlefields. Young men, brave men, who understood something you clearly do not. That there are things in this world worth standing for, worth sacrificing for, worth protecting, not because they bring wealth or status, but because they represent values far greater than any individual. 2 police officers appeared at the edge of the crowd, their presence professional but not hurried. They recognized not just an arrest in progress, but a lesson being delivered. Every morning, the guard continued, the red mark on his cheek now fading like Karen's claims of superiority. We spend hours preparing this uniform, not for tourist photographs, not for show, but because we honor every man and woman who has worn it before us, who has died in it, who understands its true meaning. The veteran touched his campaign medals again, each one a testament to battles fought long ago. The discipline you scoffed at, that's not an act. That's the same discipline that holds men in their positions under fire, that helps them put duty before comfort, service before self. Something you can't buy with any amount of real estate commission. So, what happens now? The guard asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. The law regarding assaulting a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces is quite clear. But beyond any legal repercussions, you will have to live with the knowledge that your moment of entitlement led you to strike a veteran, a man who has bled for the very freedoms you abuse. The police officers moved forward with quiet efficiency, one of them, a female officer with graying temples, speaking with the weary recognition of someone who had seen this kind of scene before. Madam, you'll need to come with us. Assaulting a member of His Majesty's Armed Forces is a serious offense. Karen's expensive mascara had begun to run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Her earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by the hollow realization of someone seeing herself clearly for the first time. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't think. No, the veteran interrupted, his voice stern but not unkind. You didn't think. You saw a uniform and assumed it was a costume. You saw discipline and mistook it for weakness. You saw tradition and confused it with theater. He adjusted his jacket, his medals catching the afternoon sun. That's the problem with people like you. You've spent so long believing money equals power that you've forgotten what real strength looks like. The guard returned to his position, his posture as perfect as it had been before Karen's assault. But there was something different about him now, a palpable air of authority that had nothing to do with ceremony and everything to do with the warrior beneath the uniform. "Take a good look," the veteran said, gesturing towards a guard as the police officers gently but firmly took Karen by the arms. "The man you struck will continue to stand his post with the same discipline and dignity he showed under your assault, the same discipline he showed under enemy fire. Not because it's his job, but because he understands something you clearly have yet to learn. True respect isn't demanded, it's earned." Karen's designer bag slipped from her grasp as the officers began to lead her away. The young child who had spoken earlier watched with wide eyes as his father explained in quiet tones the true meaning of respect, dignity, and service. The crowd began to disperse, but not before several people approached the veteran to shake his hand and thank him for his service. The RAF officer offered a crisp salute to both the guard and the veteran, a gesture of respect between warriors that needed no words, before turning and walking away. As the sun dipped further below the horizon over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the courtyard, the guard remained at his post. The red mark on his cheek had completely faded, but the lesson he had imparted would likely leave a far more lasting impression on all who had witnessed it. The veteran lingered for a moment, studying the guard with knowing eyes. "They don't make 'em like that anymore, do they?" he murmured to himself. "Thank God." With a final nod of respect, he turned and walked away, his medals glinting in the twilight. How far should respect for tradition and authority go? It was a question Karen had learned the hard way to answer today. Standing in the shadow of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of service guarded more than just stone and ceremony, she might have thought she was confronting a mere symbol. But what she truly encountered was the unyielding power of genuine service, earned through sacrifice, not bought with status. The guard's response wasn't just a defense of his position. It was a stark reminder that true authority stems not from wealth or social standing, but from the values we choose to uphold. Reflecting on this encounter, perhaps we should ask ourselves, when was the last time we mistook ceremony for weakness or tradition for mere performance? How often does our own sense of entitlement blind us to the deeper meanings of duty and honor? What would you have done if you were the guard? Could you have maintained such dignity in the face of such disrespect? Share your thoughts below. Remember, every uniform tells a story, every tradition carries a weight, and every act of duty, no matter how ceremonial it may seem, represents values worth standing for. Sometimes, it takes a moment of confrontation to remind us that true strength lies not in wielding power over others, but in standing firm in the principles we serve. This has been another story from the Royal Guard, where tradition meets modern challenges and dignity triumphs over disrespect. If you valued these lessons in honor and service, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us why some traditions are worth preserving and some values are worth protecting. Until next time, remember that true respect, like true service, is not demanded, it is earned.